Life is hard. There are so many challenges that we face each and every day, and so many outside forces stopping us from achieving our goals, that it's easy to be blindsided and not see the internal things stopping us. It's something that gives us strength and builds us up, as well as tears us down and causes us to fail. The second you dream of accomplishing great things, it's going to affect you, and if you don't overcome it, you're almost always destined to fail. The enemy of success? Our own egos. The world of My Hero Academia is similar to our own, filled with superheroes given tremendous super abilities in the form of quirks. But whilst these heroes are extraordinary to us, they are still very much human and can be consumed by their egos. In My Hero Academia, author Horikoshi excellently showcases this through 3 characters in particular, each of them showing the effects of ego at 3 different phases of the journey to success. Before we dive deep into their stories and battles with ego, let's lay the groundwork for exactly what ego is. Ego, these days, is a bit of a buzzword, and it kind of feels like everyone has their own definition for what it means. The ego we're talking about today isn't to be confused with the ego in psychoanalysis. The ego we're referring to today was described by author of the book Ego is the Enemy, Ryan Holiday, as the unhealthy belief in our own importance. It turns concern into obsession and confidence into arrogance, and affects us in 3 core phases of our lives: when we aspire to accomplish something, when we've achieved success, and when we eventually have to face failure. So let's run through the motions of how ego fights us at every phase, starting with Todoroki. Todoroki, aka Icy Hot, is a hero prodigy blessed with a half-hot, half-cold quirk. Probably the second strongest quirk in the entire series, losing out only to Great Boys. And with a great quirk comes great aspirations. His being to become the #1 hero in a society filled with greats. Early on, Todoroki is a good example of where we all begin, the Aspire phase. This is when we first look to accomplish a big life-changing goal, like learning how to cook or getting in shape. And like all of us, Todoroki has personal roadblocks that stop him from achieving his goals. Let me explain. Todoroki has had a troubled upbringing. His dad Endeavour denied him a normal childhood in order to train him to become a tool to overthrow All Might, the #1 pro hero. This kind of upbringing has left deep-rooted psychological scars on Todoroki, and as such caused him to resent his dad and his abilities. This makes him set out to become the #1 hero without using his dad's powers, to make a statement to his father. Essentially, he wants to be the best using only his mother's powers, 50% of his whole. And here is where the prime trapping of ego in the Aspire phase comes in. See, Todoroki truly wants to become the #1 pro hero, but his bitter hatred towards Endeavour has caused his ego to blindside him. Instead of putting his 100% everything into becoming the best hero he can be, he seeks the validation of his ego, shifting his goal to become the #1 without his dad's quirk in order to spite him, when in reality, becoming #1 is only possible if he invests his 100% everything into it. This is what our ego does in the Aspire phase. It's busy constantly seeking validation instead of working hard on the actual goal. Todoroki has every reason to be mad at Endeavour for the brutal way that he raised him, but now it's his ego that's holding him back. His ego wanting to deny his father everything is ironically what's stopping him from becoming the best. Todoroki's case is an extreme example of how our egos pursue validation over our actual goals. But this trapping of ego can easily affect us even in the smaller scale life goals we set for ourselves. I'm sure we all know or have experienced someone who sets out to accomplish a big goal and spends all of their time talking about it rather than taking the long steps needed to achieve it. When you start your journey, put everything into your goal. Don't talk, don't seek validation.
Just do it!
It's only when Todoroki fights Best Boy Deku at the UA Sports Festival that he realizes that his goal of becoming #1 is greater than validating his hatred for his dad. And instead of pleasing his ego in his pursuit to be the best, he realizes that he needs to put every ounce of his ability into becoming #1. And thus he removes the self-imposed limit he set on himself and continues his journey to be #1 with all of his ability. But ego doesn't just rear its ugly head in the beginning, it's also found when you're at the top of your game. Here it's especially dangerous to leave unchecked, and a lot of the time it's where people stumble the most. When you're at the peak of success, ego is also peaking with you, and no one better showcases this than Bakugo.
What are you?
An idiot sandwich.
Idiot sandwich what?
An idiot sandwich.
Bakugo, similar to Todoroki, is another child prodigy who seems like he's made to be number one. He's strong, smart, quirky, and talented, all factoring into his arrogance. On the surface, he exudes confidence. But like many, when you take off his mask and peel back the persona, you see someone rife with insecurities. Bakugo's quirk, Michael Bay, literally gives him the power to create massive explosions, which, in a world where some people don't even have powers and others get stuff like this, is especially impressive. This gift led to Bakugo being constantly praised as a child, which ultimately fed into his superiority complex. And because of that, he desires to be the first and best at everything he does. He, just like many of his peers, has aspirations to become the number one hero. And if you took a snapshot of his life before UA, he's someone that you would describe as very successful in his pursuit to this goal, which makes him a good example of how ego turns success into failure. After achieving or receiving praise for something, our egos lead us to believe that we're destined for greatness. It tells us that we're just naturally great, and so all future endeavors we have are bound to be great. There's no need to see the value in advice or practices of others because they're not as great as us. After all, if we're the ones getting all the praise and they're not, what could I possibly have to learn from them? This is how our ego sets us up to fail. It leads us to forget that a key part of success is the art of taking feedback and your ability to learn. You should always be a student at your craft and always be looking at how to improve. Realize that there will always be a lot to learn from the people ahead of you and the people catching up to you. Feasting on your own thoughts, thinking about how great you are, will only distract you from getting work done and actually improving. It's only until Bakugo is humbled by some personal defeats from his rival that he's able to take a step back, reflect, and objectively look at ways to improve himself, personally and as a hero. It took failure for him to realize and come to terms with this, and the scary thing about ego is even in failure, ego can still drag us down. Case in point, Endeavour. Endeavour is a character wrapped in controversy, and for the early parts of the series, he's a character everyone loved to hate. In the beginning of the series, he was the number 2 hero, and like everyone, he aimed to be number 1. However, due to the massive gap between him and the number 1 he was trying to surpass, All Might, his attempts at claiming the number 1 spot always ended in failure, constantly seeing himself as being in All Might's shadow. His ambition and drive to claim the title of number 1 is what propels him forward, and unfortunately it's his ego that holds him back. See, Endeavour is a pretty good example of the failure phase that absolutely no one is immune to. In life, no matter what your goals are, you will experience failure and setback at one point or another. No one is born perfect, and no one is above failure. What ego does to us here in this phase is tell us to dodge responsibility or turn our failure into hostility, which is exactly the path that Endeavour takes. In his pursuit to the top, Endeavour sacrifices everything, and all of his personal relationships suffer as a result. His obsession to become number 1 causes him to be unable to detach himself from the outcome. See, detaching yourself from the outcome means removing our self-worth from the results. When you set out on a goal to accomplish something, you will have your ups and downs, and it's important to remember to stop fixating on the end. Do the best you can and be the best you can always, and the fruits of your labor are bound to reveal themselves in time. If Endeavour could have been able to detach himself from the outcome he was so desperate for, he would not only be a much better person, but also live a much more fulfilling life. If you've made it this far into the video, first off, thank you. And secondly, you might be thinking that the aim of this video is to tell you to repress and crush every aspect of ego in your life, or simply, ego bad. Ego in itself isn't a bad thing. There are important distinctions between a strong ego and a big one. Right now, I'm gonna say an easy and practical method to ensure you're never negatively affected by ego in any of your life goals. But unfortunately, like most things in life, it's gonna involve a bit of math. A good solution to ego comes from MMA legend Frank Shamrock, who created the elegant system he calls plus, minus, and equals. In order to accomplish your goals through the intoxication of ego, You'll need this at every phase of the journey. In the Aspire phase, having an equal or a rival that pushes you along the journey causes you to remain focused on what really matters. You have no time to validate your ego, as doing so results in a chance of you falling behind the person you're competing with. In the Success phase, you need a plus, someone who's better than you. This humbles you, keeps you sober, and reminds you that there's always work to be done. Your plus reminds you that no matter how successful or how big you've become, there are others still ahead of you, and in order to catch up, you need to remain an adaptable student, constantly seeking improvement. And in the Failure phase, we need a minus. Someone who we can laugh at and make us feel better and say, well, at least I'm not you. And in the Failure phase, we need a minus. Someone who's not at our level yet that we can teach, learn, and reflect with. After all, the best way to learn and remember something is to be able to teach it to someone else. To show them where we went wrong and reflect together on what we've learned and how we can come back stronger. The inspiration of this video comes from the excellently excellent book, Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Honestly, it's one of my favorite books of all time, and it's a book I still go back and read to this day. If you like some of the ideas and the concepts talked about today, then I highly recommend looking into this book. For the sake of time, I was only able to touch the surface of the book's teachings, so if you'd like a deeper dive into ego, I strongly recommend this as a first step. This has been FighterZ, and I hope you enjoyed my first ever video. And if you did, please like and subscribe and give your feedback down below. I'm a new YouTuber starting off, so any advice and any support you can give me means the world to me. If you've made it this far into the video, then I truly appreciate you, and I hope to see you again in a future video. Until then, stay safe, stay blessed, and I'll see you next video. Peace.